From the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., this is the Tyler's Place Podcast, a podcast by brothers, for brothers, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH. Thank you so much for joining us. Do hope you'll check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Scottish Rite Masons, and also the Scottish Rite Journal podcast. Both of those links will have great Masonic content. You can find those links in the description for this podcast. Also, you're going to want to visit our new online stores. These are fantastic. Details are on the front page of ScottishRite.org. It's a brand new bookstore to get all the new Scottish Rite books and a store to order all the Scottish Rite swag you can handle. Shirts, hats, hoodies, and more. Details for those are at ScottishRite.org. Illustrious Brother Sam Welty, 33rd degree, is a member of the Valley of Norfolk, past Venerable Master, past Commander, and he is an artist. Actually, to say he's an artist is a real understatement. He's a muralist. He is creating art on a grand scale. And a lot of that artwork is Masonically inspired. And how he came to this job and how he continues to do this is really an incredible story. So he is joining us now by Zoom. And if you've got the July-August 2023 edition of the Scottish Rite Journal, you'll be able to see some of Sam's great artwork on the cover and inside the magazine. But Brother Sam joins us by Zoom to talk about his career and how Masonry influences his work. Sam, can you give us sort of a snapshot of how you become a muralist? Because this is not an everyday career path, I'm guessing.
All right, quick snapshot. I was born in Lubbock, Texas, and I grew up outside Dallas. Have no idea of the move from one place to the other because I was too young. Started drawing, first artistic memory, I was 5 years old. My older brother was sitting on the floor in the living room in front of the TV drawing monsters, as little boys do. And I said, hey, that's cool. Show me how to do that. He taught me how to draw a few things, and I just enjoyed it and kept practicing. When you practice anything for 40 years, you're going to get pretty good at it. I'm personally of the opinion that all children are good at art. If you go into a room of 5-year-olds, they all love to draw. They all love to sing. They all love to dance. They all love to do everything that's fun and creative. And at some point, life beats it out of you. Maybe an older sibling, maybe a parent, maybe a teacher, maybe a pastor, whoever says, you know what, that's not very good. Maybe you shouldn't do that. And when a comment like that is made to a 5-year-old, and their sum of life experiences thinking that all the adults and the older siblings are God on earth, they listen and they stop. And I meet people all the time. Oh yeah, when I was really young, I used to love doing that. I just stopped. They don't even remember why. But when you're encouraged and you practice, you get good at it and you can do some interesting things in the world.
You must have been trained formally, just looking at the scope of the things that you've done.
A little bit. I mean, I did art school in junior high, all through grade school. I did go to college. I took some art classes. I learned some things, yes. They were very talented instructors. The one thing I wanted to learn was how to make a living as an artist. And they couldn't teach me. They had to get a job teaching. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't great. They were incredible. And they were making a living in an art-related field, but they weren't doing their work and selling it, and that's how they're making a living. That's what I wanted to learn, and it took a while to find someone. I found a gentleman who was making a living as a window painter, primarily signage, but you see it painted on the fronts of maybe a Wendy's or maybe a car dealership, wherever. 99-cent value menu painted across the entire front of the store. So I started learning from him, and we got to where we were so efficient. Sometimes we went on a trip where we'd paint 10 stores in a day. We got to where we actually accomplished an entire front of a Wendy's 99-cent value menu message, beautifully done sign, so well done that most people thought they were stickers. And we were able to finish it in less than 30 minutes.
Wow.
And when you paint something like that where the store is 30 feet wide, you stop being intimidated by size. And because most artists I meet, they work very, very hard on a canvas that is, 2 foot by 2 foot and work for weeks. And I can work for weeks and paint something that's 20 foot by 20 foot. Or even the same period of time, I could do something that's 60 feet tall. It's just using different tools and different techniques to get the work done in the time allotted.
What was the first, not necessarily the advertising type things, but where they took you to a wall and said, what do you got? Give us your creative vision. And you kind of got turned loose to do something.
I'd done kind of wall murals a couple of times, but the first really big wall mural that I got to do was in Virginia Beach. It was for the first anniversary of September 11th. And it's a big military town around here. And
Sure.
I wanted to do a military tribute. I was still working for the window painting guy. And I just had my eye on this wall. It was the back side of what was called at the time the Flagship Hotel. And it was enormous, 60 feet tall, 150 feet wide. It was just a big blank canvas. And I wanted to do something there. So I went and I met the guy and said, hey, we have an idea for a military tribute. We'd love to paint your wall. He said, sure, absolutely. Go ahead and paint away. Well, here's what it's going to cost. Well, no, I'm not giving you any money. But still, it's a military tribute for the anniversary of September 11th. You make it happen. We got donations, we got sponsorships, we got all kinds of things. And it was my first large wall mural. And I tell you, by the time I finished that, I had learned so much about how to paint a large mural because I've never done it before.
Sure.
I immediately wanted to start over from scratch because I could have done better in half the time because now what I knew.
Now, from that, did people see that and go, hey, I need to get him over to my place and do this wall or
hardly at all. No. Everybody sees it and they go, oh, wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. Well, can I paint for you? Oh, no, I can't afford that. It's amazing how everybody likes it. They might even want it, but when they don't even want to ask how much it'll cost. I meet people all the time. They look at my portfolio. Oh, my goodness, you must charge $1 million a wall. Yeah, I wish, very often when it's a huge wall and nobody has specifically hired me to do it, sometimes I have to do it for free if it's something I feel strongly enough about. If it's a gift to the community, if it is a story that I feel needs to be told, you figure out a way to make it happen. The benefit to working for free is that when you do that, you can go to the paint store, you can go to the local lift store, you can go to local restaurants, and you can get all kinds of things donated.
When you mentioned that it's a story, I wanted to know a little bit about your process, about how you conceive those stories.
I love telling interesting stories. And sometimes I come up with a story on my own, but most of the time it is a story that I find out about, do research and listening to audiobooks or interviewing some local historian or something like that. There are 2 murals in Athens, Tennessee that I have not gotten paid for either of them. I did, some people stopped by and gave me some cash or whatever just to help out. And that was nice of them, but it wasn't a formal, we're hiring you to do this. But they were both stories that I felt so strongly about. I just figured out a way to do it. And I drove around town and I met a few people and I got the paint donated and the lift donated, and somebody provided me with a place to stay while I was in town. And, it didn't cost me near as much as it could if I had to pay for everything. But, you find a way to make something happen. There is, I don't know if we have time for me to tell the stories,
Sure.
But they were pretty incredible. The first one was about the Battle of Athens. Now there's an Athens in almost every state. This is Athens, Tennessee. And you think the Battle of Athens, that's got to be something during the Civil War or during the Revolution or whatever. No, it was just after World War II. And apparently the standard operating procedure for almost all cities or smaller towns all over the country was that if you were a city, then you had a city government. But if you were not big enough to be a city and you were a county, you were almost entirely run by the local sheriff's office. And in many, many places, that tended to turn into where you had so much authority vested in one particular person and their office of people that could turn into sometimes a mafia-style corruption ring.
Sure.
Where they would be, and at the time, it had only recently, within a few years, when the law was changed to allow the production and sale of alcohol. So for decades, they had in a dry county alcohol production that was supervised and run by and protected by the local sheriff's department. There was prostitution rings. There was all kinds of corruption and graft, and stiff arming the local businesses for protection from various things. And all the things that you see in mafia movies, and it was being done by the local sheriff's office. And the veterans after World War II came home and they saw what was happening. What had been happening, the same business as usual for decades. And they said, we're not going to be risking our lives to fight against tyranny somewhere else in the world and then come home and put up with it in our own state. So they formed their own political party of veterans and started campaigning around town. Now, the elections, there was a reason that this institution stayed in power with the corruption, is because they were rigging all of the elections. The sheriff's department, and it wasn't just this place, it was all over the country. But here it was particularly bad, where every year, however often the elections happened, the sheriff's department would supervise all of the key election points, and they would provide the ballot boxes pre-stuffed. And then at the end, they would take all the ballot boxes, go back to the prison, the jailhouse, lock themselves inside, do their own count, and then announce the winner as they saw fit. And hence their candidate always won. So this new political party of veterans, their stance was not vote for us, we'll do better. Their stance was, no matter what, we guarantee that your vote will be counted as cast. That's it. Doesn't matter if you vote for us, you will get who you elect. And that was the big thing. And of course, the sheriff's department, sensing the problem, they brought in a whole lot of muscle from outside for the election, and people were bullied, and one guy was even shot. Nobody was killed. But then they did their same thing where they took all the ballot boxes and disappeared into the jail and locked themselves in. And the local veterans saw themselves not necessarily about to lose the election, but they saw that it was about to become business as usual, and they were going to miss out their chance. So them and everybody in the town went home and got their weapons, and they converged on the jail, and they laid siege to the jail all night long. They used dynamite on the door to get in. Shots flying. Nobody was killed. A couple people might have been shot, but nobody was seriously hurt, and nobody was killed. Incredible. But they finally, because the sheriff's department was in there, and they saw themselves not only in danger for their life, but also about to lose the election. And they called for help from the National Guard, and the National Guard was on the way, because all the National Guard knows is the locals are besieging the sheriff's department. We have to come to the defense of law and order. They didn't realize they were coming to the defense of the wrong side. So the locals knew, okay, the National Guard is on the way. We better do something to end this. And that's when they dynamited the door and got the guys to come out, and they counted the ballots, and they did it in public in the light of day. All the ballots were counted as cast, and they won the election. And the old regime was, out of office. And this is after World War II, so Franklin Roosevelt was already dead, but Eleanor Roosevelt heard about this, and she kind of became their champion, and it caused sweeping political reforms and governmental reforms in all the little towns all over the country where similar things were happening. And it changed how the sheriff's offices across the country were structured to make it to where this kind of thing couldn't happen. And it happened in Athens, Tennessee, in 1946 or 7, I think. And you don't think of a thing called the Battle of Athens happening in relatively modern times. And it was just an incredible story that I learned about. And I went there and I drove around and met enough people, and I found a wall, and they said, sure, go ahead and paint. And it caused some issues because some of the families of both sides of that conflict still live there, and they don't like to talk about it.
Wow.
But there was telling the story is fun because there's still plenty of people in that town who had never heard of it, even though it happened right there. And the cool thing about that particular mural is that sheriff's department, the jailhouse, is gone. It was torn down. But I was able to paint the mural on a wall that looks down on the parking lot where it used to be. So I was able to paint a mural right there where it happened. You can look up the hill and see the buildings that are still there where the people were taking shelter from the gunfire and, firing down on the building. It was a really great spot.
Now, what is on the mural itself? Obviously, folks who are listening on the podcast can't hear, but we might be able to get pictures for the journal. What was on the mural itself in this? How do you tell that story?
There is a picture of trying to think of the most succinct way to describe it. There's a picture of a gentleman who most of the people are holding weapons because that's what was happening. But there's two front characters. One of them is holding a ballot box and the other one is holding his ballot. There was a central figure who kind of was the leader of the political party and of the efforts to make things happen. So he's the one holding the ballot box. And the gentleman the only one who was shot but not killed in the entire thing, he wasn't shot during the battle. He was shot actually during the election because he was a black man. And it was the 1940s. It was before civil rights or anything like that. And in the county of where Athens sits had always been very progressive in various aspects. So black people were always allowed to vote. But on this particular election, because they sensed that they were about to lose, they decided to get all bullyish and told this black man that he could not vote. And he walked past them and deposited his ballot and pushed past and did whatever he could to make sure that he voted, and they shot him for it. He did not die, but I wanted to include him in the mural. And then the rest of it is a compilation of various photos that were taken the day after, where there's tons and tons of people up and down the street, and the people are coming out of the sheriff's deputies are coming out of the building with their hands up, and there's cars turned over as shelter from gunfire and all kinds of things.
Wow. You're right. It is an incredible story, and it's pretty neat that you're able to tell it in a like you. I love stories, and
history is fascinating when you stop
really
worrying about the dates and the names of presidents and whoever else. You get to where the people live,
right?
And it's an incredible tapestry of this is what got us here.
So you love telling the stories. What are your other favorite sort of subjects? If I recall, I love the color and the style. You use very bold images and colors from what I've been able to see on your website and things. And what are your favorite things to work on? Obviously, you're not much for painting bowls of fruit, but what are your favorite things to kind of capture? Because all of your stuff seems to be, like you said, telling the story seems to be in motion. And when you mentioned that you're telling those stories now, that style, I definitely see that reflected in your work, that things are moving.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned all the bold colors. I do like to use bold colors sometimes. Recently, my work has gotten more and more colorful. But like the two murals I was telling you about in Athens, Tennessee, I had, because nobody was paying me to do them, I had to paint quickly because I can't waste time. Right. So those murals are actually painted in only 3 or 4 colors. And by colors, I mean varying shades of brown or gray. It's almost like an old sepia tone, black and white, where it's a black and white picture, but it's faded. It's not black and white, it's brown and white.
Yeah.
I paint the murals using those colors because it allows me to do a whole lot of detail and tell a huge story in very little time, because I don't have to worry about every color in the rainbow, the blues and the skies, the greens and the trees and the grass, every color everywhere else. And plus, it also adds to the antiquity of it if it's something, because there was not color photography back in the day. So it makes it feel like an old photograph. So it kind of 2 birds with 1 stone there, but it definitely allows me to work more quickly. If I'm not telling stories about something that happened in history, and it doesn't have to be in history, people think of history as something that happened 100 years ago or more, but even if it's something that happened a year ago, if it's a cool story, I want to tell it.
Sure.
Like there is a mural I want to paint in Hill City, South Dakota that I haven't gotten to yet. I'm working on it. I like painting things that inspire people. And if it's not a story, then I like creating an image that makes them feel good or proud about themselves to look at it. There's a mural I did a little over a year ago in Rockdale, Texas. And it's just because they approached me saying that they had a historic cattle drive. There used to be a trail that went from Texas up to where the railroads were for where the cattle yards in Kansas and various other places. And the trail used to drive right through the middle of town and right past the wall where I the building might have actually been there at the time, for all I know, because it is a very old building. And the cattle trail just went right past there. And I was fascinated by this idea of one rider, one cowboy, one gaucho. And he is in a forest of death. You see nothing but horns everywhere. And he could die at any second if he does one thing wrong, but he still has to go to work and do his job. So that's what the mural is. And I'll send you a picture of it if you don't already have it. It is just one guy riding his horse, trying to swing his lasso. And everywhere around him is just pointy, muscly, dusty death.
Wow. Well, in the era of Yellowstone, the TV show, I'm sure everyone loves that one,
Sure.
Because every suburban dad now thinks that they're Cole from Yellowstone, and we're everybody's walking around in cowboy hats.
I met him a little while ago.
Yeah, he seems like he's a pretty cool guy. Now, where does Masonry intersect with Sam Welty, the artist? So, where does Brother Sam intersect with Sam, the artist? How did you come into Masonry, and how does this influence, or does it inform or influence your work in any way? I would think it has to.
It absolutely does, because Masonry is all about giving back to the community. Masonry is all about educating people. And with my wall murals, that's what I try to do, is give back to the community and tell them something that they didn't know. If I can find a cool story about someone in history, if they're a political figure, if they're a figure who was influential in the local community, there's a pretty darn good chance that they were a Mason as well.
Sure.
So I always look into that and find out. And if they do, I try to make sure that their lapel pin is visible. That is true of the other mural that I did in Athens, Tennessee, about the state senator Harry Byrne. If I can find that connection, then I definitely look for it. It doesn't have to be there, but it doesn't have to have a obvious Masonic connection for it to be a great story about a great person, because not all people who should be Masons become Masons. Where were we first prepared? In our heart. There might be plenty of people who are Masons in heart, but never made it through the door.
Sure.
So you don't worry about things like that. But in trying to do something that is a gift to the community, that is, in my opinion, making the world a better, more interesting place, then I suppose I learn a fair amount of that from Masonry and from my family.
So what brought you, when did you, or how did you get involved in Masonry? Is this, were any other members of your family, or I kind of wandered in, looking for George Washington, if you will.
Sure.
I wanted leadership lessons, and kind of did my research and said, well, a lot of our great leaders were Masons, and, wandered in, sight unseen. How about yourself? What brought you to the door of a lodge?
It is something that I had always been interested in. I made the mistake of talking to my older brother about it, and he said, "Oh no, don't go and ask. If they want you, they'll come to you. If you ask, they'll immediately say no." Of course, he didn't know.
Sure.
But, thinking that my older brother knew at the time, now I know better, I didn't find a lodge until much, much later. I actually just randomly went to a business networking event, and I was sitting next to a guy who had a ring on. And I asked him, "Hey, what about that? Can you tell me more about that?" And I, like almost everyone, he was the guy I knew who had a ring on. Therefore, he took me to his lodge, and I joined that lodge. And I thank God daily that I joined the lodge I did, because now I have visited many, many lodges, and every single lodge has its own personality.
Yes.
Which is an amalgamation, a combination of the personalities of the people that are there. And if you make the mistake of joining the first lodge you come to without researching the other lodges that are around, now sometimes in a small town, there's only one lodge and you don't have a choice.
Sure.
But in an area like where I live, there are 20 or 30 lodges within a very easy drive of me. If I had joined some of them, I probably wouldn't be active. I wouldn't be interested, because so much, not just Masonry, but so much about just clubs or churches or anybody, it's a bunch of people who have found each other because they like to complain about the same things. And that's the basis of their friendship.
Yeah.
They like to complain about the same things.
Well, one of the things I did with in the Grand Lodge of Maryland a few years back is recognizing that all lodges have different personalities, different focus, different ways of going about things. And I realize that geography is not the only, because too often we default to geography. Well, this lodge is closest to you. Okay. Well, but maybe that lodge meets on Tuesday and that's your bowling night. You're probably not going to go. So I would.
There are plenty of places that still do that. I don't know that they do it because it's actually Masonic law, but there's so much about Masonry that is not Masonic law, but that's just how we've always done things. Therefore, that's what they tell you is the rule, and you just take their word for it, not knowing any better.
Yeah, we've got a lodge that within a few miles of where I am now, and my own home lodge is we've got lodges that are super into community stuff. We've got lodges that are super into Masonic research and Masonic nerddom, for lack of a better term. And then we've got one lodge that all they care about all year long is raising money for their big scholarships, and then they give out huge scholarships, and that's their.
Yeah. That's a great community service, yeah.
It is, but that might not be for a guy that didn't go to college. I'm like, I don't give the heck with the college kids. They can come up with their own money. That's kind of, it might not be what you want to do. You might want something else. So I always, you say something that's really near and dear to my heart was like, all lodges have their own personality. You need to match that candidate to that.
And by comparison, all Scottish Rite valleys have their own personality.
Amen.
I love my valley.
Norfolk is a great valley. So what got you to Scottish Rite? Did, in my case, it was that a brother who was a dear friend at my lodge, I'd follow him just about anywhere. And he said, hey, you should try this. And I did. And I haven't regretted it, certainly.
In my lodge we don't have the joke ongoing anymore because the gentleman in question passed away. But it used to be when I came in, what's that part of that catechism? What did you next behold? The worshipful master doing whatever the hell he's doing.
Right.
But the joke around my lodge was, and what did you next behold? Worshipful Lynroy Smith approaching me with a Scottish Rite petition, because very often, as soon as you're raised, they come to you, you should join the Scottish Rite. They don't tell you why, they don't tell you how, they just say, shove this in your face.
Sure.
And we've actually gotten to the point where we encourage our brand new Master Masons. We say, don't join any of this stuff for at least a year. Get comfortable in your lodge, finish your catechism, you can join those at any time. There's no rush. You're going to be a Mason for the rest of your life. You can do it when it's convenient. Sometimes people join everything all at once and are not prepared for the financial burden of all those dues.
Yeah. Between Scottish Rite and a lot of people going to Shriners or Tall Cedars in the Mid-Atlantic area here, or the various the gazillion different York Rite groups that are splintered all over creation. I am whatever you want to do, go do it. Just don't let anybody talk you into or bully you into it. If you feel called to go do that, go do it. Tomorrow, if you want, fine. But I also always say, we're not going anywhere. Be here when you're ready.
But I joined Scottish Rite. I did not do it immediately, but there was a particular year of Scottish Rite. The guys in my lodge had been pretty decently active in it. Every lodge, in addition to their own personality, they have that chosen appendant body that they tend to focus on. Like, you can go to lodges where everybody's active in the shrine. They might have a membership somewhere else, but you never see them. Or they're really interested in the Royal Arch, or they're really into the commandery. Okay, great. My lodge is pretty widely dispersed, but we have a lot of white hats. So at some point, we just decided, hey, let's get together, a big old group of us. And I believe there were 10 or 12 of us all in one year, and we all went to the Scottish Rite reunion, became Scottish Rite Masons. That was fine, and I barely remember any of it because the Scottish Rite degrees are rather long and somewhat dull. Not because they're designed that way. They could be interesting, but when all the degrees are put on by people who are 60 years and over and don't particularly perform them, they just recite their lines and they say, no, you go over here and then you do the thing. Or it's a very, very long weekend.
It can be. So, I'm not a big fan of one day I'm not a big fan of one-day reunions myself. I understand for some folks it's a good, brothers who are very busy with their careers, things like that it might be a useful tool to use. But I'm a fan of let's do this degree and then let's stop and talk about it. Let's we don't have a catechism.
For the maximum impact, you're absolutely right. I am of the unpopular opinion. It's not generally something that is encouraged to be talked about, but I'm of the opinion that if there is a one-day conferral coming up, yes, it does make new Masons. Does it make Masons that will stick around? No, not necessarily. Very rarely. What it does make is a whole lot of brand new dues payers.
Well, there's that, but the research tends to indicate that what we get out of that, and this is nationwide and over the snapshot of the last 15 years, is about 2/3.
Yep.
Which is not 2/3 stick around, which is not demonstrably worse.
That's way better than I would have thought. Yeah, I would have thought 10% tops.
Yeah, well, and in Pennsylvania, they did a massive one-day class. They had 1,200 guys entered, passed, and raised in this Blue Lodge, entered, passed, and raised in a single day. Mm-hmm. And they tracked them. And after 5 years, there were, I think, over 900 of them were still involved with lodges, and about 600 considered themselves active. So that's I think impressive. A lot of it has less to do with how a guy gets in the door and what happens to him after the fact. As you pointed out in your own lodge, when you, had you joined another lodge, you might not have been still active.
And if you join a lodge because you had one guy who brought you to that lodge, and you might be friends with him.
Yep.
But then you get there and everybody else is very, very old or very, very grumpy, or every single meeting is just about who died and who's in the hospital. That's what happened to my father. You asked about my family ties. My father was a Mason, and he was a 32nd degree. And my grandfather was also a Mason. I think maybe he was only initiated. I didn't know any of that until after I joined. They never told me. I never knew, because they weren't active, because they just weren't interested.
Yeah, and I think that really it's what happens. I'm sort of a 1.5 day Mason, so they initiated me in regular form, and I was passed in regular form, but I was raised at a Grand Lodge ceremony with like 300 other guys. But I was the exemplar candidate, so I actually did.
Oh, lucky you!
The whole thing, but I really think that a lot of it has to do with what happens to a guy after he gets in the, if you're in the door and then you're immediately engaged and brought in doing things that you're enjoying, you're going to come back. And if not, then you're not going to. It's just really,
if your lodge is prepared to get you involved and keep you involved and keep you interested, then yes, your chances are much, much more likely. There are specific times in a person's Masonic career when they are most at risk of disappearing into the night. That is the period of time, just a few weeks, right after they get initiated. Then there's a period of time, a few months, right after they get raised. And then there's maybe the year right after they serve as master. Those 3 times, it's very, very easy, because they don't know what they're supposed to do, or they're not sure how they can help, or what their place is, or, in the case of being master, they've spent years being an officer, and they've spent a whole year of having everything revolve around them. Everybody needs their opinion. Everybody needs their help. Everybody wants to know what to do. And they're the ones who make the call. Then suddenly the new guy's installed and nobody cares what you think. It can be quite a letdown.
Yeah, so for sure.
We as a fraternity, nationwide, worldwide, have to be very, very careful of people who have just been initiated, just raised, or just served as master. That's when they disappear.
One question before we let you go, and I've talked your ear off today, and I appreciate so much time.
I like talking. You're fine. Go ahead.
Wisdom, strength, and beauty. Those are the things upon which a Masonic lodge is supposed to be symbolically built. And often we have brothers in the lodge who are very wise, and we have brothers in the lodge who have the strength to try and get some things done, because we do have a lot of successful lodges. One of the things I think a lot of lodges suffer from is a lack of beauty. They don't think that making sure the walls have a fresh coat of paint, or that the carpet doesn't look ratted up, or that the benches or the seats in the lodge room are attractive in general. They tend to neglect that because it gets viewed as, well, we don't need to spend money on that. We don't need to, we don't need to get professionals in here to do this paint job. We can do that. And the beauty gets kind of lost to the wayside. But those three symbolic things are held in equal stead in our ritual. What are your thoughts on that as an artist, as someone whose job it is to adorn things with beauty, if you will? And to share wisdom as a storyteller, what's your opinion on how lodges handle or should be handling that portion of our symbolic support system, if you will?
I don't know.
That's a big question. It's a weird question, I think. Of
course it is. It's something I put a great deal of thought into. I don't know that I can make a call on what lodges should be doing, because Masonry is not the way it used to be. If you look at most of the modern lodge buildings, they're ugly. They're just big old piles of brick or corrugated metal. They're not beautiful. They're not interesting. You go in there and every lodge has their collection of old photographs and the collection of photographs of past masters, and maybe the plaques or the certificates that they've been. And there's an American flag, which is usually the most colorful thing in the room. And there's been decades of unimaginative masters or past masters or whoever. Well, we got to paint the room around here. Oh, well, it's blue lodge, paint it blue. So you go into the building and everything's blue. All the upholstery is blue. The carpet or the tile is blue. That's my favorite. It's not tile. It's the formica or, whatever the floor covering is. Very bad colors of blue. My lodge was like that before I joined. Everything, because it was built in the 1920s, right about the time that the local naval base was being built. And it was built by a lot of the people who were working on the naval base were members of the lodge. And I'm pretty sure that our lodge building was built by stuff that fell off the truck. That, just because as a contractor, you're building a building on the naval base and you order this many lots of bricks and you're finished with the building, and look at all the stuff we've got over. Take it to the lodge. Let's build a building. And it's built very, very well, but it's not really designed to be beautiful. And when I joined, everything was painted this baby blue. The beautiful wooden doors and woodwork that we had been painted over a long time ago, baby blue.
I call it mental institution blue.
Yes. And it was depressing. The carpet was blue. The chairs were blue. And thankfully not the same baby blue. But I came in and we started coming up with a design plan and executing it over multiple years. And we started stripping the paint off of the wood and bringing back the warmth of that. And we painted the walls instead of that institutional blue. They're now, some of them are a much warmer color. Some of them I've actually faux finished to look kind of marble-ish. I painted murals around the area. Some of the murals I started in 2008 and I still haven't finished because nobody's paying me to do this. It's just something I do in my spare time. But it makes it, when your lodge, the reason I do it is because when your lodge is the one that is most visually interesting, you tend to want to go visit that lodge. Other lodges around there where it's not interesting, they want to come see, oh, you got to see what they did over at that lodge. And that's one of the reasons we do it. And it's about creating a culture. In my area, we have Norfolk number 1 and the Grand Lodge of Virginia. Norfolk number 1 is actually in a little bit of a dispute with a lodge in the Boston area for which one of them is the oldest lodge in the country. Now, they're going to lose that because they can't prove their point, because back in the day, all the buildings were made out of wood. Cities burned down in wars, or there were plagues or anything else like that. They don't have the records to prove it, but they still have the heritage of having been founded in the very early 1700s, possibly the late 1600s for all we know. And it's an old thing. And there are many lodges that are offshoots of that lodge that are still around. The lodge that most of our members came out of was chartered in the early 1800s. So My lodge, being chartered in 1922, we don't have a long history. Even though we're over 100 years old, we don't have that history and heritage and the pictures of people from the mid 1800s and the officers, and we don't have relics from colonial times. We don't have that. So we have to create our own culture. And we have, with the furniture that we got, we built a man cave where you can sit around, and we're the only lodge in the area that has one where you can sit around on a nice leather couch. And used to be we would smoke cigars inside. We stopped doing that. Everybody goes outside for that now. We had a television. You can watch movies and play video games. There's a stereo. You can play music. There's murals everywhere to make the place a little bit more inviting. We started wearing kilts to meetings just to differentiate ourselves and establish ourselves as a lodge set apart. And we get some grief from other lodges about it, but we take that as part of the story that we're telling about who we are. And it accomplishes all the things that we could not do with our actual history. And we make it to where this is who we say we are. This is who we choose to be. And it's a good team exercise, a team spirit building.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more about the way it has to be. We've got when I came into my lodge, it was painted that mental institution blue, and I kind of looked a little bit, and they, we had this beautiful trim that was, it looked like columns all the way around the room, but it was all painted over with just the same color as the wall. So none of it popped out. And, it was, again, that baby blue. So I went on to the trustees, which, kind of run the building, and started saying, well, we need to get the place painted. And I found a buddy of mine who I played in a band with. He ran one of the CertaPro outlets, and he did it for us super cheap. And we went with a real bold blue and bright white trim, and it like made all the difference. And then once people saw that, they got excited.
Yep.
And
it's been that way for so long. Yep. Now you make it something different, and you shock their system, and wow, let's get to work.
Yeah, and they then last year completed the final puzzle piece. Is my second year master. We replaced the 50-year-old ceiling, 50-year-old ugly drop ceiling with this new LED lighting, and we've got a big spot over top of the altar that's sheetrock, sort of a bump out that we're going to have painted.
Is that drop ceiling that was originally installed, and it was white, but it was so filled with nicotine and whatnot? It
was sepia tone at this point.
Yes, absolutely. We've got the same one. We're working on it.
Well, let me tell you, it wasn't cheap. Our original estimate was $300,000, and we finally found somebody to do it for $110,000. But we've got a nice sheetrock section with LED lighting over top of the altar that we're one of our brothers. His name's Jim Butcher. He's also a muralist. Doesn't do as much work as you do, but Jim, his job, or most of his life, is he was in the military. He was the military artist in residence for a couple of different conflicts from Vietnam on through the 80s. So we're trying to get him some scaffolding so he can get up there and pull a Michelangelo for us and paint some.
And that's difficult to do. I don't work on scaffolding anymore because depending on how old he is, all of the weight of that paint, all of the weight of him personally has to be physically hauled up that scaffolding.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have some folks help.
That will take the life out of you real quick.
He's in his 70s, but he is, our ceiling's not that high, but he's in much better shape than I am at his age. He's still bad.
Well, you let me know if he needs help painting. I'd be happy to come up and paint.
I absolutely will.
But to finish answering your question, though, I just realized while you're talking, not every lodge has a mural artist.
Sure.
Not every lodge has somebody who's a professional woodworker or something like that. And most lodges, the ones we're describing that are so ugly, they're new construction. They were built since World War II. All the lodges that are older than that, built in the 1800s, they were beautiful buildings. I mean, I realize it's just a virtual background, but you're sitting in the library at the Scottish Rite House of the Temple. Mm-hmm. It's a gorgeous building, and it was built in the 1920s and 30s. Masons had the money and the pride to build beautiful buildings because they saw the value in it. They might still have the pride, or they might still have the desire, but the cost of doing something, of painting murals, about $300,000 to replace a drop ceiling,
Yeah.
For crying out loud, I wouldn't be able to do it either. That craftsmanship and workmanship if you don't have members of the lodge who will do it for free, it has to be paid for. So
and in a bygone era,
back in is very tough.
In a bygone era, it's very likely that you did have a professional woodworker in your lodge who helped put those things together, because there were so many more people doing those trade type of jobs.
You're right.
You might have had a doctor.
It was all done by hand anyway, but now it's all done by machine. And if you don't have the machine, you're
right. And if Amazon can't bring it to your door,
yes, sir.
So, well, Brother Sam, I feel like you and I could hang and talk all day, but for folks who are interested in your art, samwelty.com is the best place to check it out.
Yes, that's SAMWELTY.com, or on Instagram is even better because I can put new pictures up there.
Illustrious Sam Welty, 33rd degree of the Valley of Norfolk. He is a Scottish Rite Mason and a muralist. You can see some of his work at samwelty.com. We've got links in the description for the podcast, and you'll be able to check out his work there and on his social media pages, all of which are linked at his pages. And I do think you should definitely check them out. It's really interesting stuff. And when you see something like that, to know that it was painted by a Scottish Rite Mason, well, that's definitely pretty cool. Thank you for joining us on the Tyler's Place podcast. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH, Scottish Rite Mason. If you're interested in becoming a Mason, you've got a story for us, you just want to reach out, you can always do that at podcast@scottishrite.org. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Tyler's Place.